My name is Jory Candelario. I'm the director of APAIT, a division of special service for groups. Thank you for joining us. Earlier this month, APAIT began a mental health awareness campaign called My Wellness Journey Starts With Me. It featured some of our campaign ambassadors, including Laverne Cox and Margaret Cho. Tonight, we continue our campaign, which is a 4-part series. But tonight, we highlight specifically Asian Pacific Islander Awareness Month. In addition, today, May 19th, we also commemorate National Asian Pacific Islander HIV Awareness Day by integrating our Status is Sexy campaign. To share more about our Status is Sexy, please join me in welcoming my colleague and the co-creator of the campaign, Jimmy Sianapar. Jimmy.
Hi, everybody. So my name is Jimmy. I've been with APIT for about 7 years. As you know, it is API Heritage Month and National Asian and Pacific Islander HIV/AIDS Awareness Day. And even through this pandemic, APIT continues to provide essential services like HIV testing to vulnerable populations. I would like to give a shout out to our APIT testing counselors who are in the front lines providing HIV testing today. So APIT has always been at the forefront since the beginning when it comes to bringing awareness and bringing community together and putting a stop to HIV stigma. Even now, APIT has a campaign called Status is Sexy, where regardless of your status, it is always sexy to know your status. Kelly who is one of our ambassadors of Status is Sexy, and as well as one of our panelists here tonight, did a video for Status is Sexy. So I will play the video for you really quick.
Oh.
One moment.
Actress, and these days my brother is calling me also an activist. I wear it proudly. Sexy to me is all about confidence, really. I mean, it's really not about looks, it's about how you feel about yourself. I've always felt that the sexiest people in the world were just people who knew themselves and felt good about themselves, and that was always sort of attractive to me. Sex is not as big a deal as everybody makes it out to be when you're young. And sex can be fun, and it can be beautiful, and it can be soul meshing. Sex can be whatever it is you want it to be. I guess most people fear death, and I guess that's like a normal fear, but I think my biggest fear is not living as full a life as I can before I die. I have absolutely no fear of getting an HIV test because well, for one thing, I've never been afraid of needles. It's never. I'm the kind of person I like to know. I like to know if there's ever going to be anything that I need to take care of. I'm going to take care of it. I don't believe in living your life in the dark and just relying on hope. I don't think hope is a contraceptive. I don't think hope is going to save you from anything. You actually have to take action.
All right.
Thank you so much, Jimmy.
Thank you
so much, Kelly.
Wow,
Now
I
it
felt
is-
like that was such a long time ago.
Well, now I'm really thrilled to introduce to you our moderator, somebody that I've had the fortune of working with in the past, Miss Shumai. Miss Shumai is a second generation Taiwanese, Hongkongese American drag queen. Originally born and raised in the Bay Area, she now lives in Los Angeles, where you can catch her hosting and performing at Game Boy in West Hollywood. She also co-produces LA's first monthly API drag show called Send Nudes. She hopes to use drag as a way to build community among queer APIs and explore the issues that are prevalent within our community. So without further ado, Miss Shumai.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for having me for this panel. Something that Jury also didn't mention is that I'm a former staff member at APIT too. APIT also allowed me to meet my drag mother, who was Maria Roman, who put me in drag for the first time. And I really got so much out of my time working at APIT. And so you could say APIT birthed this drag queen, helped at least aided in it. So yeah, thank you so much, Jury. As everyone here, as you may know, May is Mental Health Awareness Month. The idea of mental health can be somewhat vague, nebulous, and sometimes is used as a buzzword. However, meanwhile, people might feel that something is off and we don't know where to reach out to, where to start, and how do we have the language to talk about this? How do we even talk about this? And with this panel, we hope to bring our voices and experience to help out all of us to better understand what that journey can look like. May also happens to be API Heritage Month, the Asian Pacific American Heritage Month. I hope we're all celebrating that. And today, May 19th, is National Asian Pacific Islander HIV/AIDS Awareness Day. As the API community, we are aware of the disproportionate ways we are impacted by world events such as the COVID-19 pandemic, based not only on race and culture, but the intersecting identities we may carry, such as sexual orientation, age, gender, ability, immigration status, and HIV status. Each of our panelists have personally or professionally been exposed to these issues, and we are so excited to have them here today. I'm going to go ahead and introduce our panelists. First, we have the beautiful Kelly, who, Kelly, I'm loving the purple hair, by the way.
Thank you.
Kelly Hu is a Honolulu born and is a renowned model and actor whose titles include Miss Teen USA in 1985, in which she was the first Asian American to win the title. Her acting credits include X2, X-Men United, Scorpion King, CSI New York, Vampire Diaries, and Hawaii Five-0, just to name a few. Give it up for Kelly. Cue audience applause that we cannot hear.
Thank you
Up
so
next-
much for having me.
Yes. Up next, we have Leo Sheng. Leo Sheng is an actor who, through openly sharing his journey of transitioning, gained notoriety through various online platforms. Leo's credits include the feature film Adam, as well as the L Word Generation Q. With this platform, Leo works to challenge the filmmaking industry on what positive representation means and looks like on screen. Give it up for Leo. Up next, we have Sammy Cantu. Sammy Cantu is a comedian, model, and brand ambassador for APIT's Status is Sexy campaign. His credits include the movie Uncle Reese, the Pretty Dude series, and he has performed stand-up all over SoCal. Hello, Sammy.
Hey, how's it going?
Up
Good to
next,
be here.
we have Heather Enciso. Heather is a licensed clinical social worker and currently the clinical program director at APIT in Garden Grove. With over 10 years of experience in the social work field and having worked with many different populations, Heather is passionate about serving marginalized communities and assisting individuals and families navigating the complex systems of care. Hi, Heather. Your lighting right now is really, really good, by the way. I just wanted to say that.
That means a lot because it's coming from you.
All right. So I'm just going to be asking questions to the panel. I'll let you know who these questions are geared for, or if they are going to be for anyone who would like to chime in. Later on, we are going to be taking questions from the audience. So if you, and for anyone who is watching, if you do have questions, feel free to type them in the chat and we will answer them later. All right. So the first question I have is for Ms. Kelly. Kelly, what has your mental health journey been like? Where did you start and how did you know it was time?
Time for what?
For time to start managing mental health, your mental health?
I think I had a little bit of a difficult childhood when growing up in Hawaii, my parents getting divorced and it was always kind of rocky. My mom was pretty good about just sort of checking in on us. It's not necessarily an Asian thing, right? To be doing therapies and things like that. So it wasn't until I was on a TV series, and I got criticism for being too fat for being on the show, and it sent me into a spiral, and I became bulimic, and that's when I finally decided that I really need professional help. And it was, of course, I remember telling my mom that I was going to see a therapist, and her first reaction was like, "Why?" I was like, "'Cause you." No, but I found it so helpful, and I wondered why I hadn't done it sooner. It was really life-changing. And it not just made me feel better about myself and what I was going through, but it made me a better actor as well.
Thank you so much for sharing that, Kelly.
Mm-hmm.
Same question, Leo. What has your mental health journey been like, and where did you start?
I'd say from day one. I have two moms who are social workers, licensed clinical social workers, and I feel like that's like, I had parents who, checked in on me. I also had parents who knew how to check in on me. But it's always different, I think, when it versus, being in having a boundary of going to a therapist's office and having your parents be your inadvertent therapists. So really, I think my official personal journey started probably when I was 11 or 12, around the time that I was understanding my identity as a trans person, as a trans guy. I was probably one of the youngest people in my class to start going to therapy at 12 years old. And I stayed with it. I've continued to stay with it. And I've been so grateful to have that access and to have the privilege of that care. And I remember I took a little bit of a break when I moved out here in July, because I didn't know how long I was going to be out here for. The show I'm on, we didn't know if we were going to be renewed. I didn't know if I was making this big move for nothing. So why set roots, including reaching out to a mental health professional. And once we got renewed for season 2, I was like, I'm staying. I got to find a therapist out here. Our showrunner, when we were all cast, and since last July, I asked us regularly, do you have a therapist? Have you started going to therapy? Because you're going to need it. Which is great. I mean, that taking away a lot of the stigma of just normalizing, this is a really difficult job. A lot of us hold core identities. That's difficult itself. And so my journey has been very, I think, kind of organic and very, not linear, because therapy journeys, I don't think, are linear. Mental health and wellness is a very long journey, but it's been constant. And so I've had the privilege of access to mental health and wellness services, and I just kind of stayed with it as long as I could.
That's so awesome that you got such an early start to that. I seldom hear anyone starting therapy that early in life, which is super duper dope and very inspiring to hear. So thank you, Leo.
Thank you.
So our next question is for Sammy. So Sammy, just like Kelly, you're a brand ambassador with APIT and created an awesome video for our Status is Sexy campaign. Ginny, do you mind pulling up the video for us?
Ah!
All right, one moment.
Seems only fair.
It's only fair. No, don't do it.
I know, I watched the video and I thought, I was not super sexy in that tent.
Me either. I don't feel sexy in mine. I feel sexy now. We can do it over again.
All right, here you go, y'all.
I'm Sammy Cantu, and I'm a stand
Oh, did it freeze? Or is it only on me?
No, it's
Oh,
frozen.
okay, it is frozen.
Yeah.
No,
Not you.
I think
That's perfect right
I
there.
think it's frozen.
Like that.
Sammy wanted to highlight the comedy. So.
Yeah.
Sammy, you might be saved from all of this.
Hopefully, I'm trying to hack your guys' Zoom meeting right now.
I'm Sammy Cantu, and I'm a stand-up comedian. The fact that I'm able to make people laugh, that's what makes me confident. I like that I can, give people laughter. That's like a gift that I have, and I make me feel confident when I talk to people. Personality, man, that's all it is. Like, you can have all the muscles, man, you can be all ripped and jacked, but like, that's all gonna die out one day. We're all gonna be shriveled up, and it's who you are on the inside. It's really gonna show out. I'll just tell them to do it. Just go out and get tested, because a lot of people are scared. A lot of people are embarrassed. A lot of people think they'll bring shame to their family or their friends or to themselves. I believe that status is sexy.
All right.
Work,
That wasn't bad at all.
No, man, you
not bad
guys
at
edited out a
all.
lot of stuff though, for sure. Thank God. I tend to drag on my answers, so thank God you guys edited it.
So speaking of answers, Sammy, we do have a question for you following that video. Sammy, in your words, why is it important for API individuals to know their HIV status?
Well, I mean, it's definitely important to know because, like, I mean, look at right now with everything going on with the whole COVID and stuff, man. It's like you want to be responsible more than anything, right? It's not about being like looking bad or looking like, people still have this stigma about STDs being gross. It's so normalized now. It should just be like, getting like a checkup for anything, right? Just like your mental health. It's like a cold or something, right? Just go get tested. Because you don't know who you're going to end up, being with. I know people who end up getting like STDs because the other person didn't want to tell them. And it's like, what's worse, right? Isn't that like so shady? It's like, I would hate if somebody gave me one knowing that they knew they had it. So yeah, man, I just think it's very important because I don't know, man, it's just, we're too old now. We're not in high school anymore. We're all adults here. You should be, responsible and the sooner the better, man, because honestly, it happens, and it's not like you're a bad person for it. So that's what people gotta stop thinking. That's the stigma around it, and that's just not true. Yeah.
Thank you, Sammy.
Yeah.
And so to follow up with that, from participating in the Status is Sexy campaign, what did you learn from being a brand ambassador?
What did I learn from being a brand ambassador? I mean, I definitely learned a lot more about STDs and like the varieties of them, and just how you can get them, how you can't get them. There's myths that you can get on a toilet seat. Didn't realize that's completely false. Yeah, right. Yeah. So I mean, just the stuff like that. It's like the little things, and confidentiality and like the all that. Like I didn't know all like the politics, I guess you can say. I don't know if I sound educated for this question, but I yeah, I was expecting the first question, the mental awareness. I was preparing myself for that question. You just switched it up on me with the brand ambassador one. So, but no, I definitely learned a lot. Like I said, I only knew so much from high school about STDs, and then like going to your guys' organization, it definitely opened up my mind about the wide range of knowledge that is STDs and getting tested and all that. So that's what.
Yeah. Thank you, Sammy. Yeah, I like what you said that we don't get a lot of knowledge from when a lot of us were in high school, because a lot of our STD education in high school is not going great. As someone who was a client in a previous health educator APIT, I learned so much about everything, and it's crazy the amount of misinformation that is out there amongst people who are at high risk, and knowledge is power. So, Ms. Kelly,
Yes.
same question. What did you learn about participating, or what did you learn by participating in the Status Sexy campaign and being a brand ambassador?
I actually did not realize before this how easy it is to get a test and how quick you can get the result. Because of course I grew up in the 80s and as a teenager, so little was known about HIV. And so I learned how advanced medicine has become since the 80s and how really quick these tests are, quick, painless, and just how easy it is to get one. I've gone to West Hollywood and gone into one of those vans where you can get them done like immediately, and I think that's amazing. I love that it's that easy. And so there really is nothing to fear anymore.
That's right. And APIT also has a mobile testing unit as well. I'm not sure if it's operating now with the pandemic or not, but
that would be tough.
During normal times, it's out. All right, so we're gonna shift gears back into talking about mental health. This next question is for Leo. Leo, how has identity shaped your mental health journey, and what sort of issues related to identity have you discussed in therapy?
Wow, what identities haven't? I mean, goodness. So I mentioned that I have two moms who are licensed clinical therapists or social workers. I was adopted as an infant from China, and I grew up in a predominantly white family and also a predominantly Black school district. And so like racial identity has been a massive part of my journey for my wellness and my mental health. Kelly, you were saying earlier, like it's not typically an Asian family thing or like an Asian culture. And I found myself nodding, but being like, oh, I really don't know what that's like. And so I just wanted to like affirm that and acknowledge that because I hear that from so many people. But I'm sorry?
No, I just agreed. Yeah. It's true.
Yeah. And so that's, being an Asian American person who grew up in a non-Asian family is a big part of my mental health and wellness journey. Having grown up with two moms and having had a pretty traumatic portion of my childhood, having a parental figure who was pretty verbally and emotionally manipulative and abusive for a fair amount of my life. That's kind of what preceded me starting therapy at 12. But it kind of snowballed into me just having all of my inner thoughts and feelings really getting to be hashed out and explored and expressed in a really safe and comfortable environment. And I forgot to mention is I had a therapist at 12 and I had a second one for gender related issues because as somebody who eventually wanted to medically transition, I had to, according to my state's guidelines, had to have a letter from a licensed therapist who specialized in gender. Back then, gender identity dysphoria, but now gender incongruence. I don't know if that's actually changed. So please someone correct me if that's changed again. And so I think overall, to answer the question, is really my racial identity and my queer identity have very much been kind of in this like dance together, this very complicated dance together my entire life. And I think about the ways that they affect one another and impact one another. Being a queer Asian person who's also now an actor, and that's a new identity that I'm exploring, is acting and artist. And I was studying to be a social worker actually before I got this role. I've completed my first year of social work grad school. I was getting my master's. And so this is, thank you. Props to all social workers and anyone in social services and care professions. Massive props. And so it's always been this very interesting journey of, I think once you learn one thing about yourself, it opens a door to another thing about yourself, another identity you didn't realize you had. And so these identities of being, again, an Asian queer person and an adoptee and someone who experienced some trauma as a young kid. And they cannot be separated from each other. And so they very, very much impact every therapy session I have and have had for the last 12 years.
It seems like you kind of had to be an actor to help like work all of that.
Honestly, it does. You were saying, focusing on your mental health kind of helps you be a better actor. And I think mine is like, yeah, it's kind of both. For me,
Absolutely.
it's like vice versa. Being an actor has helped me with my mental health in some ways, and exploring these different ways of expressing stories and taking on emotions and being able to healthily process them and put them aside once you're done with them.
And Leo, just a quick thought. You know, you can be a social worker since you already have a year of it, and still be an actor. So it's never too late to go back.
This is true. Yes, they're not mutually exclusive. Many people have multiple professions.
That's
I technically only have 1 year left to complete. I have like 15 credits, 30 credits left to finish it, and so that's on the table.
Maybe
have
you
an
could do it
internship with
online
us.
right now. Maybe you could do it online right now. It seems that everybody's offering all these classes online.
Yeah,
It's
I
not
did
like we
look
could
into
be
it.
like back in production for a while anyway.
Right. Oh my gosh. Yeah, we were saying, you know, September maybe in the earliest. But I know like USC. I looked at USC in different programs, but I have currently 30 credits, and some will take maybe up to 12. And I'm like, that's a lot that you won't take.
Take it from somebody who went to USC and got his social work degree online. So you can do it.
All right. Thank you, Jerry.
Thank you. Yeah, thanks so much for sharing that, Leo. I love what you said about how all your identities and your experiences are all intersecting, and that none of our lived experiences exist in just like vacuums and silos. So I think that's something really important that, for me, especially as an artist, that's something that informs a lot of my art as well. And it's also something that informs a lot of my mental health care as well. So thank you for saying that, Leo. Also, how cool would it be to be like a celebrity actor and also a social worker? Like, that'd be so dope.
That might make things a little difficult, but
I didn't say it was going to be easy.
True.
But it would be iconic, Leo. It would be truly iconic. So this next question I have is for Heather. Heather with the good lighting. As a licensed clinical social worker, what are some trends that you've noticed in terms of the API community accessing therapy? And what are some cultural considerations when working with this population?
Thank you, Miss Shumai, for asking that question. I do want to add, you know, Leo, you could definitely have an internship with APIT. So, you know, you know, just putting it out there, right? We support our community. But anyways, thank you for that question. So I do want to address, you know, the racially insensitive rhetoric that has been happening with, you know, some public figures and politicians, and how that has contributed to our, you know, API community. And, you know, research has shown that API individuals underutilize mental health services. So when you have that other factor with COVID-19, right, and the misinformation, mislabeling of COVID-19 as the coronavirus, which kind of, you know, fuels the hostility, the racism, the xenophobia, a lot of individuals that do identify or that are part of the API community are not accessing mental health services. And it's so important that we as providers have these ongoing conversations. And we know that API individuals, there's a lot of reasons as to why they don't access mental health care, right? There's a lot of stigma, right? Our community doesn't talk about mental health. Sometimes you can't even translate that word. I can't even think of the translation for like Tagalog. It's just, I think it's called sira ulo, which means like broken head. So it's just such negative connotation. And I think, you know, as a provider, when we're working with this vulnerable community who has a history of underutilizing mental health services, I think, you know, for all our lovely panelists here, you know, using your platform, having that voice, normalizing mental health services is so, so important, so that, you know, we notice that the newer generation, they're more inclined to access mental health services, but our older generation, and then on top of that, we're doing telemental health services via Zoom or telephonic. They don't even probably have a Facebook account. So, you know, having the younger individuals assist them with accessing mental health services. I did want to point that out because, you know, let's just be honest. I mean, there's a lot of xenophobia and racial slurs. And as an API community, we already have those barriers, right? The stigma, the shame, the saving face. And if we can collectively discuss this and normalize it, I think people would be more inclined. And also, you know, APIT has a lot of services, everyone. And we're doing everything that we possibly can, and they're free mental health services. So we have a lot of great programs, and we've already transferred over to telemental health. We want to make sure that our providers, as well as our clients that we serve, are safe. So I did want to point that out.
Thank you so much, Heather. As for the mental health services that APIT provides, how can anyone listening who is interested or wants to pass the info along, how could they find out some more information?
Thank you. So I'm based out in the Orange County location. We do have 2 locations. So we have a location in Koreatown and Los Angeles. I'll definitely let Shuri, elaborate on that. In terms of APIT in Orange County, you can just call us. You can go on our website. You can call our number. I can give you that number, or you can, I know a lot of people here connected to Zoom via like a registration, so we can give you that number as well. But I think the first thing is giving yourself permission to access mental health services. And if you are having a hard time just calling, maybe get the support of a friend, or maybe email us when you're ready, but just please give yourself permission, because I know that can be very hard. I know that when I first went to the LGBT center at UCI, that was just hard, because I was outing myself. And I think it's so important that we normalize this, and I think it's so important that we give ourselves permission, because we do have a lot of internalized stigma, and that will prevent us from growing and going on this wellness journey. So allow APIT to assist you, and you can call us either at our LA or OC location. We do have a fabulous website. So
can I ask a question? Do you guys only deal exclusively with the LGBT community, or do you deal with just anybody in the Asian community as well, or how do you define this?
We actually see everybody. So
yes.
The spectrum within the LGBTQI2 spirit community, we really see folks who are vulnerable. So many of the communities that we serve really encompasses the diverse communities that Los Angeles represents, whether you're Black, Latinx, Asian American, Native Hawaiian, Pacific Islander, whether you're queer, bi, cisgender, heterosexual identified. We see everyone, as long as you have that need. And basically the best way to reach out to us is just, if you want to email us, info@apaitonline.org. That's usually the first step. And, we'll get back to you right away.
Good to know. Thank you.
Thank you, Kelly.
And for all of our participants, Jimmy, do you think you could possibly put some of that information in the chat so that people could see it, maybe click on the link too?
Yes,
so that way, yeah. Access is the first part of a mental health journey. And so, I have a quick follow-up question to Heather and or to anyone else. What's some advice that you would give to someone who's trying to get, say, their roommate, partner, friend or something to get into therapy?
So again, I think it's important to start off with just a conversation, right? And kind of just normalizing things. And as a therapist, I know that if I want to kind of encourage one, I first need to build that rapport, right? So they need to feel safe. They need to feel comfortable. They need to feel like they can have this conversation with you. And maybe sometimes even self-disclosing if that person has utilized mental health services, and highlighting the benefits of mental health services, right? Because with mental health services, when you are connected to a good therapist and there's a therapeutic alliance, there's a significant reduction in anxiety, depression, low self-esteem, crying spells, suicidal thoughts, ideation. I can go on and list, you know, the criteria for DSM, but I think if we just start with the conversation and normalizing it and making that person feel safe and comfortable to self-disclose whatever concerns or issues they may have, that's a good starting point. I mean, you can kind of be subtle with putting, okay, well, here's a Psychology Today magazine, here's a journal, you know, like subtle ways. But I think just, you know, having that conversation, you know, I went to therapy, I was scared at first, but then I loved my therapist and she helped me so much. And now I don't need her, I just need to check in. And, you know, sharing that positive experience can really reinforce that.
Thank you, Heather. That was something that came up. Oh, Leo, sorry.
No, I was just like totally 1,000% agreeing. That was like, yeah, wow.
Yeah. All right. So thank you so much. Our next question is for anyone who would like to chime in. As Heather mentioned, the Asian American community members have been sharing experience of increased levels of discrimination related to COVID-19 and perhaps a misplaced or racially fueled blame for the pandemic. What are some things that you have observed during this time?
Well, I've hardly left my house, so I haven't really experienced a whole hell of a lot. But just today, I was with a girlfriend. She was helping me do my hair. And she said that, you know, she's been going out, getting groceries and things like that. And she says that she hasn't been attacked per se, but she is definitely treated not as good as she was before. She'll go grocery shopping and she'll notice like the people at Gelson's are not kind to her anymore, or people will give her looks in parking lots. Or she said when she gets into the elevator in the building, because she lives in a high rise, if she is in the elevator, somebody, you know, will look at her, see that she's Asian, and, you know, like not let her in the elevator. You know, just things like that. Those are just the little subtle things outside of like the big attacks that we're hearing.
I was way
and
more.
Those subtle things, those microaggressions, they add up too. They really do.
Well, because it gives permission, right, for the bigger things to happen.
Right. Theo, you were going to say something?
I felt more afraid in the beginning, I think, as there was more uncertainty, and still folks trying to figure out what was happening, and like the beginning of the displacement of anger and fear and whatnot. And I remember like going to Ralph's with my roommates. My roommates are white passing, and I remember like having this like sudden fear as we were leaving to get into the store. Like, what if someone says something or does something? Like, would my roommates, what would they do? Not that I wouldn't trust that they would intervene, but I realized we didn't have a plan, because in what world did I need a plan for this? But it's also been a very huge reminder and wake up for like I myself am a supporter of the Black Lives Matter movement as an organized movement and Black activists. And there've been a lot of, you know, calls of awareness saying what we're experiencing is new for us, and we can sit with that and we can honor that and validate that. And it's also a similar this unwarranted and unsolicited violence is something that many Black and Brown and Indigenous folks face so regularly. And so what we're experiencing is, as somebody put it, and I don't remember who was on Twitter, and I want to give proper credit, but it was like, I'm really sorry, I can't remember exactly the phrasing, but it was something about our proximity to whiteness not going to protect us. And this idea that we're supposedly safe. And so, you know, and it goes to the model minority myth and the history of Asian American relations. And so for me, what it's been is a huge reminder that community solidarity amongst people of color specifically is very complicated and very nuanced and very necessary. and that our experiences with this are incredibly valid, and we should be talking about it. And there's also room to be acknowledging like how have we stood in solidarity with other folks when things like this have been happening. So it's been a huge reflection. It's been a huge like kind of hopeful call to community. So yeah.
Thank you for sharing that, Leo. Yeah, I think this whole experience with all the rises and prejudice towards our community, it's just like, you know, it's another reminder that we have to stay in solidarity with other marginalized communities as well.
Before I get something, I was wondering, Sammy, did you want to add?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Because we're talking about just like the effects of being Asian during this time. It was rough, man. Again, I can't even lie. Like, I would go running. I live in like a predominantly white neighborhood over here in Riverside. I would go running sometimes, and fucking, you know, people would run past me, and they would just like cross the street, but they saw like a white person run past them. They pretty much like high five each other. I'm about to say they actually high five each other, not like that. But they wouldn't even move. But when they saw me, they would like cross the street. Like, it was so crazy in the beginning. And I don't know, man. I was scared, man. So I was hearing like Asian people were getting beat up, and like I know I live muscular, man, but I can't fight. Like, I'm not gonna fight anybody. But people, like, I was scared to go running outside my house because I don't know, man. Because people were like, Asian people were getting beat up, and usually, like I said, Asian people in general are not the type. We're not really a violent type in America. We're very soft-spoken, right? Very, you know, down low. Like, there's the guy who got, you know, beat up on the United Airlines plane. Like, he just got beat up. He didn't even fight back, right? Like, we're very soft people, man. So, like, yeah, man, I was very scared because, like, you know, the prejudice was real. Like, everyone was out for Asian people, you know? So, yeah, man, it was definitely tough during the beginning. Now it's kind of like calmed down a little bit, thank God. But there are still prejudice out there that we're the predominant people that would have it, you know? So, yeah.
Yeah, I, you know, one of the things that I found the most interesting when this all started was that someone wrote in the comments when we were talking about all the incidents that were occurring in the beginning, someone wrote in the comments, you know, welcome to being Black. And it didn't really occur to me until they said that. And when you just said, like, somebody like literally crossed the street to avoid you, I remember some of my Black guy friends telling me, you know, how they would just be walking down the street and they would notice people like crossing the street to avoid them, you know, to walk on the other side of the street. Michael Clark Duncan, who, you know, an actor who he told me a story when we were working together on Scorpion King. He said, you know, it used to be that when the elevator doors would open and they would see me, he said he would literally see people cower because he looked so ginormous and, you know, big Black guy getting into the elevator. They were automatically afraid of him. He said, but after he won the Oscar, people recognized him and the elevator doors would open and there'd be a smile on their face and they'd want to shake his hand. So it's, you know, it's something that is very new to us, but has been happening with the Black community for a very long time. And it really gives us sort of a taste of that medicine, right? To understand where they've been living and how they've been living in this community. And so, yes, it makes us makes it even more important for us to realize, you know, that we do need solidarity. We do need to change this the way that people think and view us, all of us.
Yeah,
absolutely. And I guess one thing I do want to add, you know, I'm hearing from the panel the importance of solidarity, and you know, I think solidarity is definitely very important, particularly for vulnerable and marginalized communities right now. And you know, speaking to what Leo had said earlier, you know, there's actually a shout out I want to make to one of my dear friends who started this Facebook blog or Facebook group called Black and Asian Solidarity. Her name is Diana Gia, and they actually, you know, generated this petition and various petitions in terms of just making sure we watch out for each other as community members. You know, we all have, as people of color communities, have had very different paths, you know, in terms of how we've been perceived, how we've been discriminated against. And I think the Asian community is not immune to that. You know, we have are Japanese and Japanese Americans who were in World War II, right, in internment camp. I mean, in concentration camps. In the same way, our Jewish community during the Holocaust, and certainly, it goes on, and that continues to be pervasive in some ways in modern society. For example, with human trafficking, right? Human trafficking is still alive and well. It just has a different face, right? We see that here in the work we do with massage parlor workers who are primarily monolingual Chinese or Korean speaking. But because they don't speak the language, they are brought in here. They're human trafficked essentially. So that struggle continues. And I know that adage seems really cliche, but the struggle is real for all of us in communities of color. So the importance of really sticking together, I think, is a really powerful message. So, solidarity for sure amongst us as, folks who are vulnerable, including the Asian community.
Yeah, I think I wonder too, I know this is slightly outside of the topic of mental wellness, but I wonder too, how the conversations, if the conversations around like solidarity, particularly with Black and Brown communities and Indigenous communities, how that'll grow out of this. Because I think what we're, again, going back to, I mean, there's so many pieces of New York Times and various, well-platformed mediums share, people sharing their experiences, Asian Americans sharing their experiences of facing violence, or specifically, most likely East Asian Americans, because we know that the rhetoric has been around calling it the Chinese virus and the Hong flu or whatever. And so that's an important distinction. Around what this idea, I don't know. I mean, this is the kind of social work I was studying, both clinical and community organizing. And so I'm always thinking around Asian communities and again, from someone who didn't grow up in Asian household, but our history of colorism and anti-Black racism in this community, and how that has been affecting our processing and the way that we're hoping for solidarity and looking to each other for solidarity. So yeah, I'm curious to see what kind of work and progress comes out of this. I don't know.
Can I just add one more thing? I have so much to say. I think though that we just have to be very careful about how we don't want to just look for solidarity within with other minority, people. I think we have to be careful not to exclude the white community, the members of the white community who are also willing to help us and be allies in our cause, because I feel like it's going to be all Asians and Hispanics and Black people, all colored people against white people. And we have to be careful not to make it seem like that's what's happening, because I think that just causes more of a divide. It just causes people to become more afraid of what we're doing. But really, I think to reach out to allies in all communities is really important, so that we don't, make the white people feel marginalized, or, like they're, getting power taken away, or whatever, because I don't think that's helpful.
No, absolutely. I think you're on. It's about, I think you hit it in the nail, Kelly. It's about allyship, right? How is it to be an ally? Not just, racial ethnic communities, but also within, the spectrum of the LGBTQ, right? Because the same could be said within, I think, the LGBTQI2 spirit community, where there is a history of marginalization with, for instance, the transgender nonconforming communities, not necessarily being prioritized when it came down to, how do we make sure everybody's equitable, so there is that. But I think right on your point, solidarity, allyship, and being able to comfortably as communities of color have that healthy, constructive dialogue with our allies, right? Whether it's within racial ethnic communities or within the LGBTQ spectrum. And actually, when I hear Miss Shumai's thoughts on this, because Miss Shumai is just as equally been, or still is involved, I think, within our community. So, Miss Shumai.
Let's hear it.
Definitely. I echo everything that y'all have said about allyship and solidarity, I actually was scrambling to look up an article that I had shared on the Book of Faces about how the Asian community, how the API community can show up for the African American community right now. And I'm going to drop the link to that article now. So
Nice.
yeah, it's like an article that's like 20 steps that our community can stand up, can stand in solidarity, you know? So it's like, it's really good to see these kinds of things posted, to see that there's like, you know, yes, it's one thing to believe, but allyship is not just an identity. Allyship is not just a badge that you have. Allyship is an action. It's about like how you, it's not something that you can just tout and say, I am an ally to this community. Allyship is something that you have to show, you know? It's something that you show, and whether you get thanks for it or not, you're doing the right thing, you know? So, and that's something that I, whenever me and my co-producer Blasia, we host a monthly API drag show. Something that we always do is, number one, a land acknowledgement. Number two is also like saying like, you know, how can we as the API community be better allies, because allyship is an action, you know? How can we be better allies to the indigenous community? How can we be better allies to other communities of color and marginalized communities? And I think that, you know, it is important to reach out to folks who are in privileged communities that who are allies and want to help, but it's also equally important for them to learn how to help and not to ask that emotional labor from us who already have to do the emotional labor of existing. So yeah, so those are my thoughts on that.
Have y'all seen that it's technically a worksheet, which I've used a few times, but it's it's a column of actor, ally, and accomplice, and it lays out, I think it was originally, I want to say it was created by like Black activists, but it lays out the difference between someone who engages in allyship, like kind of what's kind of the base of allyship, and what's an accomplice. An accomplice, like if you like talk about like legal, you know, someone who's involved in a crime, but someone who's actively involved in whatever system you're deconstructing or whatever work you're doing, and like willing to also take those hits so that you're not the one who's like being targeted. I don't know. So like, I guess an example, maybe if I'm understanding it correctly, would be like if say someone is you know, starting to espouse anti-Asian rhetoric at me at the store, you know, an ally would be somebody checking in with you maybe, but an accomplice would be maybe like physically stepping in and like and taking some of that heat. That's my interpretation of it, at least. It's a really interesting worksheet. I don't have a link to it right now, but I would really recommend it. It's been really helpful.
I think I found it.
Oh, did you? Amazing.
Yeah, I'm quick.
You're so fast.
So. I'm a Virgo, so multitasking is like, you know, what I do. So it's, I think did I just drop the link?
Yes, you dropped something.
There we go. It's by a website called Racial Justice Allies, and I'm not sure if this is the worksheet you're talking about, but it does have like different columns of talking about the distinction between all three of those identities or actions, I guess. Yeah.
I wanted to add, when I went home yesterday, and the Filipino channel was obviously on because my mom was watching. They were talking about I Holla Back. I think it's like a website or a movement, and they talk about like the 5 Ds, right? And so when one is experiencing that, you know, the racially insensitive rhetoric, whether it be at a supermarket or you're running or jogging, right? How to de-escalate, right? And kind of, it's so important, right? Because there is that bystander effect. Sometimes people think that someone else is going to intervene, but then nothing happens, right? So I think it's so important, if we're gonna be working in solidarity and be allies of each other, that we are really paying attention and being very active, right? Because an ally is not just something that you say one time, but you make a concerted effort each time, right? And I think also, rather than just focusing on our differences and, you know, really together looking at how we're all resilient communities, right? Like, again, I'm gonna, as a social worker, trying to look at a strength-based perspective, we may have different struggles, and we do, but what are our similarities, right? In terms of our ability to overcome, whether it be, you know, oppression, isolation, being labeled other just because we're undocumented, etc. So I think that's really important to highlight our resilience that our community continues to develop.
Thank you for that, Heather. I love what you said about, you know, highlighting our similarities and using it as a tool for solidarity too. As important as it is to celebrate our uniqueness and our differences, it's equally important to celebrate what's similar to all of our communities as well. So taking that, I'm going to move on to our last question for the whole panel. After this, we're going to open questions for to the audience for audience Q&A portion. So for those of you who are watching, I see there's a Q&A option on here. I don't know if that's like something we're using. I don't know if Jimmy, you can tell me, or if people are just going to be typing questions into the chat. You're muted. Okay, anyways, but for anyone who does have any questions for our panelists, feel free to type them into the chat with an option of all panelists and attendees, ? Unless the Q&A portion works, I'm afraid to push the button. So our last question, and this is to anyone on the panel, do you have any coping related tips, and how are you coping with this current time, and how are you taking care of yourself?
Leo, it went over to you.
I sighed. That was my thinking sigh.
You know what? Can I just make a comment that Leo has like a crown on his head? Yes, the entire time. Yes.
I thought about moving it, but I realized the wall is so
Royalty.
clean, so ugly otherwise.
No, I love it. I love it. Yeah. But coping, I think that for me, I've been enjoying this time at home. I have to say, it's only stressful when I get too much news and when I'm connected to other people who are going down like the conspiracy rabbit holes, because there's so much of that going on. I try to listen to everyone with compassion, because even if I don't agree with them, it's hard to. I think it's still important to listen to where people are coming from, as opposed to just like blocking them out. But that for me has been the most challenging, is to deal with other people and all the all the stuff that they send you on like emails and all the articles and things that are just take you to like all these conspiracies. So I've been really trying, especially now more than in the beginning, to try to just not spend so much time online and not be so letting all that sort of information hit me. I think it's okay to, like, if somebody sends you something and like, oh, you got to see this, to just not look, and just give yourself a break from all that stress and fear that's going around these days.
Yeah, thank you, Kelly. That actually brought up something for me, because I was talking to my therapist about it, and because we had our first like telephone therapy session, and she asked me if I was limiting my social media, and I was like, no, that's how I pretend that there's actually people around me. And so it's very interesting, because it's like, yes, I kind of like use social media as a way to, like, connect to other people, and it's a way for me to stay connected in this time. But at the same time, when there's all these, like, when people are like sharing news articles of like, oh, this person passed away due to COVID, this hate crime happened, this blah 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 blah, these people protesting when they should be staying inside. Like, it's such a weird balance to do. So yeah, that's something that I think that we can all be a little bit more careful about. Like, something that's helped me, at least, is like paying attention to where these specific, more emotionally laborious social media streams that tend to show up, like where those articles tend to show up, lessening my time on those has actually helped me cope a little bit with the time that we are all in right now.
And you're describing social media as your way to sort of connect to people in the outside world and stuff like that. But I think sometimes we forget that that does not substitute for actual human connection, you know, because those are just people like making comments. But like being on the phone with somebody and actually having a conversation, or, you know, just talking to your neighbor across the hall with your mask on or whatever, that's like a whole different, I think that's a connection that really feeds us. And sometimes I think social media is one of those connections that really takes a lot of energy away from us, you know. So I think that we have to really be careful of how we define connectivity.
Yeah, I think it's definitely a balance, you know. It's, you know, just like you both said, it's what is the emotionally like supportive, and then what is the emotionally draining, right? Where do you find that balance? Because we are in that digital age, right? And you know, I'm in my 40s, but I also interact with folks who are, you know, in the next gen and certainly much younger, where I can't even get you know, they'll never respond to me if I call, but they'll respond to me via text, right? Those kinds of things, right? Sometimes it's generational, so it's like finding that balance. But I think you both bring very important points that human interaction, right, is really important. That conversation, and sometimes a conversation could be via text, right? Sometimes the conversations by phone, and even at the peak of COVID-19, you know, we couldn't really do that face-to-face meeting that are used to, and it's about finding that balance. But going back to the whole, I think Shumai's original question is, how do you manage, you know, your mental health during this time? It's about self-care, and however you define that self-care for you, I think is important. For me, as we're kind of hopefully easing out of shelter in place or stay at home, I was really thrilled to be able to start going to the parks, start going and playing tennis, and re-engaging with, you know, folks that I've missed, right? Because we've been in quarantine. So to me, stress management, one of the things I picked up over time is playing tennis, like hitting that ball and killing it, and, you know, sometimes hitting somebody at it. I'm a stress reliever. I don't encourage it all the time, but it's a way, right? It's an outlet. Whatever it is, the outlet for you that works, I think, is, you know, what self-care is. And it's so different for different people. And, you know, I'm curious to hear from Leo and Sammy, and, you know, maybe even Jimmy, what you do, and then Heather as a therapist, what self-care things you all do.
Jimmy, do you want to go first? Or Sammy or Heather? I don't want to. I've been speaking a lot, so.
Yeah, I mean, I'll go. Well, you know, as like a disclaimer, first before I get into like how to cope with it, just know like I was a complete mess the first month and a half of this whole COVID thing. I did not cope with it well. So before you take my advice, just know like don't be fooled by what you see on like you know, Instagram and stuff. Man, a lot of people were struggling, including myself. Man, it's just like let's see, March was like the last time I did a show, a comedy show, and you know, this year was gonna be a big year for me, man. I was gonna, you know, perform a lot more places, a lot more bigger places, and then one by one, you know, just got canceled. Like festivals get canceled and that, and it just seemed like this whole big year that I had planned out for myself was just falling apart. So then, like, I fell apart. You know what I mean? Like, I wasn't eating right. You know what I mean? I think I ate like jelly beans in the morning, like a week straight. Like I kept eating jelly beans every morning. I just didn't care, man. I was like, what's the point, right? Like, you can work so hard for something and just get taken away by some, you know, godlike thing to come down. And so like, it was very hard in the beginning, man. But then like, you know, what this has taught me is to like be patient, I guess. You know, like, you know, I'm 27, which I thought was like old, but apparently it's like you still in the prime age, apparently, right? So it's just that. And then like, you know, a lot of people are saying like reconnect with like human connection, all that. You know, I also think like you should think about the things to disconnect from, right? Like an unhealthy relationship you have with someone, maybe you're in a bad relationship that you've been sticking around with for so long. It's like now maybe the time where everything's shut down, maybe think about like leaving that relationship or maybe leaving that job that you just never like doing. Kind of really think, is this the life I want to live right now? Do I really want to be at the job the next 40 years? You know what I mean? When they could just kick me out like that, right? And like I'd be out the job, right? Like really think what you want right now. And yeah, man, reconnect with people you really want to reconnect with. I think one thing for me personally that I've been doing is spending a lot of time with my little sister. She's like 15. And so that's been really cool because she didn't get to grow up with me. She's my half sister, so she didn't get to grow up with me. So she didn't really have like an older brother, but now I can kind of be there for a lot of the time. So that's been really cool for me personally. So it kind of gives me like a motivation to keep working out, keep writing, and just make sure that I am ready by the time all this blows over and ready to go back to work. So.
Yeah. Thank you, Sammy. Anyone else want to share?
I am been watching way too much television for anyone's good. I was told that it's supposedly tax deductible if your our subscriptions. Who knows? I mean, I had to get incorporated. I don't know. I don't know anything about taxes. But yeah, so I've been watching Netflix and Hulu and everything that's coming out. But it's also, I mean, I've always been someone who watched way too much TV, or depending on who's counting. I mean, I've always loved television. I've always loved this ability to, and even more so now that I can understand and appreciate it more, what goes into making these programs. Really wanting to support a lot of these programs and these movies and shows that are coming out with representation. And I'm currently rewatching Avatar: The Last Airbender. I mean, it's not the most mature thing to watch, but I am very much enjoying that. And I do some writing sometimes. I do some prose and experimenting with screenwriting, and it's really, for me, one of the biggest things that I am forever grateful for. I say this to everybody, is I have 3 roommates, and we live in a house, and I am very, very privileged for the access to not only the shows I'm watching, but like having roommates who I get along with. Or we're hearing a lot about people who are stuck home in really unsafe situations. So I have a very safe and comfortable situation. And movies on Friday nights together. So community has very much been a big part of this.
So I'll share. I think I'm the last person. So in terms of coping skills, I definitely have been limiting how much information I take from the news, because I could just get inundated with too much COVID-19, right? And I remember when this initially started, my head was just pounding, and I was like, okay, Heather, stop. You need to assess yourself, and you need to intervene, and you can only take it in small doses. So that's one technique. Another technique that I've utilized is we do have a local trail near where I live. And I remember when, there was starting to be a lot of xenophobia and racism towards the API community, and that I wear shades so that they couldn't decipher that I am Asian. But I have a small nose, so you can't even see my face anyways when I wear the mask. So that's what I was doing. When you work out, you release endorphins, which is good. And then I've been using various apps, reconnecting with a lot of friends and family members. And it's really cool on this app. There's like a Pictionary game. And I'm a horrible artist, so I made a lot of my friends laugh, and that's a great way of coping. So that's what I've utilized.
Yeah, something for me that has actually been really healing during this time, especially for me as someone whose main art form is performing live and interacting with people like face to face and feeling the energy from like an audience. something that was really healing for me was actually a lot of shows have been doing like Zoom dance parties, where like they'll have like people perform, and also they'll have DJs playing, and then you're like they'll like highlight you, and that's like the closest it's felt to being in like a room with my community again. And so yeah, that's been really healing, and my show's doing one of those on June 5th. Does anyone else have anything to add to the coping skills before we move on to our audience Q&A?
I up my therapy from every other week to once a week. That's been really helpful. And if that's something that people have the access to again and the resources to utilize, highly recommend it.
Absolutely. So if you notice that, you know, again, you want to self-assess, right? And if you notice there's an increase in depression, isolation, if you want that social interaction, just because we are practicing safer at home doesn't mean that we have to isolate from each other, right? And we could do this through various mediums, right? So if you need to advocate for yourself and increase your sessions with your therapist, you know, do that. Again, APIT has wonderful mental health services. So, you know, you can definitely get connected with us. We are in LA and Orange County.
I think I would add just one thing, just you know, like simple thing for me sometimes is just like leaving the house, bro. Like just go for a walk, man. Especially living in California right now, man. You're in California in the middle of May, like you get beautiful weather right now, man. It really does help to leave the house sometimes. Like you're so stuck in your thoughts and in your bed, just sitting there till like 12 or noon or whatever it is in the afternoon. Take it right, like you're in your head too much sometimes. It's crazy. This thing is dangerous, bro. This is the most dangerous thing in the world. It's your own mental health, dude. Like, leave the house, man. Put some music on, man. Just walk around, take a hike somewhere, you know. Take a shower too, man. Clean up, like you know what I'm saying. Like, dude, I swear to God, taking a shower feels so good, dude. And then just go for a walk, and I promise you, you have a little bit of clarity. I'm not just gonna fix your life, but you have a little bit of clarity. I promise you. So that's that.
Totally, like I was just like wearing sweats and stuff, but like now I'm like, all right, I'm not going anywhere, but I'm gonna get like my button down on, and I'm gonna like wear shoes, you know, big things.
Exactly.
I haven't gotten there yet.
I was
You can tell.
gonna keep this a secret, but I am wearing sweatpants.
I knew it.
under
There
my
we go. See,
I told y'all.
right? This the hair is hard enough. No, I need to know, Miss Shumai, how many layers of lashes do you have on?
Oh,
Seriously.
These and only Black and trans owned cosmetic company.
Oh.
You can, if you want lashes like these, you can use my discount code Shumai at checkout for 20% off.
Yay!
And I'm not lying about that.
Okay, write that down in our little thing, in our notes as
You
well.
have to share the link.
Yes, share the link.
You have to share the link.
All right, I'll drop that in a little bit. So for now, we're gonna move on to our audience Q&A portion. We have about 13 minutes left, so we'll try and get through these relatively quickly. So the first question, I guess this is for everyone. What has been the greatest lesson you've learned thus far in your journey?
Mine's been a longer journey, I think, than ever. But so I think the most important thing, you know, coming from Hawaii, being Asian is a thing for me. Until I went to this pageant on the mainland and realized that we were a minority. But I didn't even realize what I was doing at the time until decades later. But rather than sort of apologizing for being Asian and sort of being uncomfortable about it, what I ended up doing in the pageant was I celebrated being Hawaiian and being different. And I figured I was not going to win the pageant because I was never going to win against all of these, you know, blonde-haired, blue-eyed, Barbie doll-looking girls. But what I think what ended up helping me win was that I was so different, and it made me stand out. And I celebrated the fact that I was different, and that I was an individual, and that I wasn't going to look or be like everyone else. So I think carrying that, you know, now celebrating, you know, the differences and your uniqueness, for me, that has absolutely been key. That and having a great sense of humor. You got to laugh at yourself. You can't take yourself seriously.
Yeah, I mean, I bounce off that. That's definitely how it was for me. You know, being, you know, Mexican and Vietnamese growing up, I always thought that was just weird. You know, people were just thinking that's weird. So in my head, I'm thinking that was always weird. And that's kind of what like stopped me from even doing acting and modeling and comedy. For like, nobody's ever heard of a Mexican, Vietnamese actor, model, comedian, right? But I'm like, but now as I growing up, I realized, wait a minute, nobody's ever heard of that. That's a bigger reason why I should do it, right? Because there's nobody like me. And you're right, you should definitely embrace those uniqueness about you, especially right now, man. Not everything's black and white anymore, right? You want all the uniqueness, you know, ethnicity, looks, whatever it is, we embrace it. And I promise you, I think one thing I'll add to it is that you just got to be undeniable, man. You got to just always keep going, keep knocking on the door. That's it. Don't stop. Like, somebody's gonna find you eventually, you know. I remember when I first did comedy, like I would always invite people to my shows, like, oh my God, like I'm so down to go, and then they wouldn't show up, and then I would feel bad, like, oh, is it me? But then I kept doing it. Now, when they don't come to my shows, they feel bad, like, oh my God, I'm so sorry I missed your show. I'm like, to me though, it doesn't matter though, because I already know who I am. I know this is what I want to do. So yeah, just find out what you just kind of. It's a long game. Long game.
Thank you. Does anyone else have anything quick to add to that? Time. This next question, what is a practical, doable action that people can do to build allyship during and after this crisis?
I'm not talking anymore.
I guess, well, if I would to give a quick answer, there is the link that I dropped in the chat of how we can show up and show out for. And I think, I'm not sure if this question is specifically from, like, for example, like someone showing allyship to the API community, or from the API community to other communities and whatnot. But putting, like, allyship takes the level of like putting yourself out, like putting yourself in a place where you're protecting, and it's a risky thing to be an ally. Allyship shouldn't feel safe, right? So really actually taking action to do so. Donating to not only to nonprofits and other organizations that serve these communities. Also, there's very many people artists who like don't have a lot of gigs anymore. There are people who are trans and non-binary who don't have access to a lot of things right now. And so donating to them directly is actually very, very helpful too. Yeah.
I just wanted to add, in terms of being an ally, it doesn't always have to be. So for example, when I used to work at a medical hospital, I was the emergency department social worker. And we did have a client, they came in, they were on a 5150. The nurses and the ER doctors and physician assistants were not honoring this patient's identity, right, as a transgender woman. So it was so important for me as an ally. I knew that I was going to get backlash. I knew that these medical doctors, these nurses were already engaging in ignorant conversation, but I had to make sure that as an ally, as an LGBT, and I did that. And I think it's so important to be aware that as an ally, people are going to disagree with you. They might fight with you. You know, as when you think of like the hierarchy, right? In the emergency department, I was already low because I'm a social worker, right? You have the doctors that are up there, then you have the physician's assistants, and you have the nurses. So luckily, you know, they were kind of receptive to what I had to say, but I made sure to educate them in a way that it could be digestible for the healthcare workers. And I think, again, being an ally, it doesn't always have to be where there is an audience or you're just taking pictures and, okay, I'm an ally. You could do it with one event, right? And just speaking up, saying this is not acceptable. And, right, kind of that whole bystander effect. You don't let it go. You address it. Meanwhile, maintaining your safety as well as that person that you're trying to advocate for and protect. So I think that's really important. We can do these in simple, like really small incidents, right? We talked about microaggression. You can be an ally there. You can address it and protect yourself as well as that other individual that you are trying to support.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you for that, Heather. Thank you for sharing that experience. I think that especially within healthcare, like honoring identities is so important, just because healthcare can be scary a lot of times. And so making sure things are a safe environment, whether it's mental health, healthcare, or just spaces in general, embracing and correctly acknowledging someone's identities, names, and pronouns are very, very, very important. I'm gonna go ahead and ask the next question from the audience. There are two questions that are a little similar, so I'm gonna basically ask them both. So what are some suggestions or tips or advice that you might have for folks who are physically distant from their families, but how do you talk to them about providing better mental health to the older adult family members who might not believe in mental health during this pandemic? I know that one's a doozy.
I think, you know, okay, so we talked about this earlier, right? We know that historically speaking, like API communities don't really access mental health. And then there's just a lot of ongoing barriers, especially for the geriatric older population. But sometimes just making that connection, calling them, how are you, right? And checking in on them can show that, oh, someone's actually, you know, part of my support system. Someone cares, right? Sometimes, you know, we are all really busy, but I think that for me, it's so important to allocate time for the relationships that I care about. And sometimes just that quick check-in, how are you doing? What are you eating? Have you eaten? You know, this question was specifically for a geriatric, right? Did I misinterpret it? It was, okay. So then asking them, did you shower? Did you take your medication? You know, just something really simple. How did you enjoy Jeopardy? Did you enjoy, you know, TFC? I'm referencing TFC because my grandma keeps popping up in my head. It's a Filipino channel, right? So I think just checking in with them, you know, asking how they're doing. You could even, if you have the ability, they're not too far, dropping off a meal, you know. Yes, you're trying to practice social distancing, but at the same time, you know what their favorite dishes or dessert is. I know that's what my family is doing. You know, so I think it's so important to find innovative ways to still connect with each other. And it doesn't always have to be face-to-face. You can call them and just talking to them and letting them speak, you know, but be invested, right? Don't just say yes, 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 but actually be engaged. And
I feel like you've been listening in on my mother and my conversations. No, but I love the idea of bringing a meal. I did that for my neighbor across the hall who's 70 years old, and she just finished chemo, so she hasn't been able to really leave her house much. And there's a program that I got involved in called Bofo Hawaii, which is buy one, feed one. And it encourages people to go to local restaurants and buy, not just for a meal for yourself, but for somebody who might need it, you know, whether it be an older person or a person who hasn't worked in a long time, or a caregiver, or a healthcare worker, or you know, just anyone. I think that it's great to when you can do that. That's such a great way of showing your aloha, you know.
Yeah, I love what you said about just like, you know, checking in and having a conversation too, just because like it does just start from a conversation. And something that I've been talking to my parents about is that how therapy has actually been helping me. And so that's been going pretty well. It's still a journey, obviously. And I think something to also keep in mind, I think Leo said this earlier, that journeys are nonlinear, right? So like, but we have to keep going and keep talking about that. Especially if we're trying to get our older family members to actually just even believe in mental health in the first place, you know. So yeah, we are almost out of time. I will answer one last question really quick. This last audience question is for me. Miss Shumai, what are your favorite songs to perform? Sorry, I rolled on that just because it was not on topic, but I'm always on topic. So I like performing to either K-pop songs or sexy bedroom songs. There's nothing in between. Yes.
Amazing. That's perfect.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. You can catch me performing at any of my shows that will be posted on my Instagram. Anyways, thank you all so much for being a part of the panel today. Leo, Heather, Sammy, Cantu, Kelly. Thank you, Jury and Jimmy, for helping to facilitate this. And I know for anyone who's listening, and for all our panelists too, you know, we did talk about some things that are heavy, that could be potentially even triggering. I think it's important for us to know how to ground ourselves, whether that is just like, you know, focusing on your breathing for a little bit, focusing on, you know, there's a exercise that I've done in certain spaces where it's like you think about like 5 things you see, 4 things you hear, 3 things you feel, 2 things you smell, 1 thing you taste, or something like that. I think just grounding yourself can, after this, can really, really help if you are feeling any sort of way. You can also visit APIT's website, apitonline.org, for some more information about accessing behavioral health and housing services. And if you do ever feel overwhelmed or in crisis and need to reach out, there is a national suicide hotline that is available at 1-800-273-8255, which I am going to just drop in the link right now, and or the Trans Lifeline at translifeline.org. If you are youth, the Trevor Project is available at, I'm not going to read the number, I'm just going to put it in here. And yeah, thank you all so much for tuning in to our panel today. Happy Asian Pacific American Heritage Month, as well as happy Mental Health Awareness Month. Any parting words, Jury?
Yeah, so just again, thank you all to the panelists, Leo, Kelly, Sammy, and Miss Shumai, Heather, and Jimmy. Just a quick plug. So we basically are doing this mental health series throughout the whole month. This is our second one. We have 2 more coming up. One is on Thursday night, 7 p.m. And that will be very specific to the intersections of queer men and mental illness. That's this coming Thursday, May 21st at 7 p.m. And then the next one will actually be next week after Memorial Day weekend, right? It's already the summertime. It's going to be on May 28th, Thursday night, and Thursday afternoon, I should say, 5:00 p.m. And it will focus on people living with HIV. So again, we thank you so much for being part of the panel. Stay safe and be well. Have a good night.
Thank you. So nice to meet you all.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you guys, man. Appreciate it.
Thank you.